Hello and welcome to Truth in Time. Imagine waking one winter morning and finding your city swallowed whole, not by war or flood, but by its own breath. Street lamps glow dimly in a soup of yellow-black haze. Trams grind to a halt. Voices are muffled. People stumble home coughing, unable to see more than a few feet ahead. That is the scene London lived in December 1952. When a deadly fog rolled in and refused to leave for days. To understand the Great Smog, we must start with ordinary life in post-war Britain. Coal was not just fuel, it was identity. Houses, factories, and power stations burned vast amounts of coal to heat homes and rebuild an economy ravaged by war. Smoke hung over cities every winter, an accepted nuisance. People expected sooty chimneys, blackened faces, and smoky air, but not this. In early December 1952, the weather played a cruel role. A cold snap settled over southern England. A high-pressure system, an anticyclone, trapped air in the lowlands. Normally, wind and rising air would disperse smoke and gases, but this time the atmosphere inverted. A layer of warmer air set over the cold surface, sealing pollutants in like a lid. For days, that toxic soup collected, coal smoke, sulfur dioxide, soot, and other particles accumulated until the air itself became a hazard. On December 5th, the fog began to thicken. At first, it was disorienting. Buses ran late, ferry crossings slowed on the Thames. Then the unusual started to look ominous. Trams screeched to a halt. Because drivers could not see the rails ahead, ambulances struggled to find addresses. The docks slowed as visibility collapsed. By nightfall, the fog was dense enough that some people could not see their own feet. Hospitals saw an immediate influx of patients. Emergency wards filled with people struggling to breathe. Those with chest diseases, the very young, and the elderly suffered most. Market traders watched animals fall ill and die. Gardeners found crops damaged. The fog wasn't just nuisance, it was toxic. Chemists and doctors at the time were just beginning to understand what made this smog so lethal. Fine particles and sulfurous gases that penetrated lungs, inflamed airways, and intensified heart and respiratory disease. For 5 days, the city staggered on. Newspapers ran dramatic headlines. Television cameras, still a relatively new presence, captured muffled scenes, policemen appearing out of haze, street lights dim with filth, figures staggering along deserted pavements. The fog disrupted commerce and life. Theaters canceled performances, offices closed early, and public transport operators issued safety warnings. Many people simply stayed in their houses and hoped the air would clear. When the fog finally lifted on December 9th, the immediate picture seemed, at first glance, less apocalyptic than some feared. But the true toll emerged only slowly. In the week of the smog, official counts recorded several thousand excess deaths attributable to the event, people who would not have died had the air been cleaner. Later research widened that estimate. Across the months that followed, the excess mortality attributable to the Great Smog was likely much higher. Historians and epidemiologists today generally put the short-term death toll in the thousands, and excess deaths in the months afterward could be several times that initial figure. Whatever the exact number, the human cost was unmistakable. Families grieving parents, children, neighbors. Beyond mortality, the Great Smog exposed how vulnerable modern cities could be to pollution. It made visible the link between everyday technology, domestic coal, smokestacks, and industrial furnaces, and public health. Importantly, it stripped away complacency. This was no longer something to tolerate as just fog, politicians, scientists. And the public confronted a new reality. Air pollution could kill on a mass scale. The inquiry and response followed. Public pressure, outraged newspapers, and passionate testimony from doctors forced government attention. Medical professionals documented the surge in bronchitis, pneumonia, and circulatory problems linked to the smog. Scientists analyzed air samples and hospital statistics, connecting particulate matter and sulfur dioxide concentrations with the spike in illnesses and deaths. The evidence mounted that this was not a freak weather event alone, but a man-made catastrophe amplified by climatic conditions. Policy followed concern. Out of the fog came reform. The crisis created the political will for the Clean Air Act of 1956, landmark legislation that changed how Britain burned fuel. The law introduced smokeless zones, regulated industrial emissions, encouraged cleaner fuels, and helped relocate heavy polluting industries away from dense population centers. It was not an overnight fix. Change took years and required investment and cultural shifts, but the act marked a turning point in environmental governance, a recognition that the state must intervene to protect public health from industrial byproducts. The Great Smog also reshaped scientific and public discourse on air quality. It spurred a new field of research. Epidemiologists, chemists, and atmospheric scientists refined methods to quantify pollution's effect on health. Instruments, monitoring networks, and national standards developed in the years after 1952, enabling governments to track particulate levels, sulfur dioxide concentrations, and later nitrogen oxides and ozone. The legacy is visible today in air quality indexes and policies worldwide. Human stories anchored the statistics. Remember Christabel, an elderly widow whose ration coal stoked a one-swarm flat and whose heart condition worsened in the smog. Or Charlie, a bus conductor who lost his sense of direction in a white-yellow gloom and later coughed until he could no longer work. These were ordinary people whose lives were interrupted and, for some, ended by an invisible enemy. Communities responded with courage. Neighbors checked on each other, doctors worked long shifts, and volunteers helped the most vulnerable reach medical care. Those acts of solidarity remain a key part of the story. There is also a lesson about technology and progress. In 1952, coal was cheap and central to economic rebuilding after the war. But what long-term cost did that economy impose on human health? The Great Smog forced a reevaluation. Progress that harms public well-being is not progress at all. Governments and industries gradually shifted toward cleaner energy sources and better emission controls, decisions shaped by the memory of December 1952. The international implications should not be overlooked. London's disaster became a cautionary tale for industrializing cities around the world. Cities with heavy coal usage, dense populations, and unfavorable weather patterns, from Pittsburgh to cities in Eastern Europe and later in parts of Asia. Watch and learn. Over decades, global awareness of air pollution grew, contributing to the formation of environmental movements and international cooperation on air quality standards. The story of the Great Smog also intersects with questions of social justice. The poorest neighborhoods, those reliant on cheap, dirty coal, and with limited access to health care, bore the heaviest burden. Vulnerability was unevenly distributed. Where you lived, worked, and how old you were determined how likely you were to suffer. The smog reminded policymakers that environmental harms often overlap with social inequalities, a lesson that informs modern discussions about climate justice and environmental policy. Today, when we red air quality warnings or watch apps show particulate matter levels, we live with a technological inheritance that began taking shape in the 1950s. The Clean Air Act and its descendants saved lives, but air pollution remains a global problem. Urbanization, vehicle emissions, and industrial output create new forms of smog, chemically different, but capable of similar health impacts. Modern pollution debates echo 1952. How to balance energy, economy, and health, how to protect the elderly and infirm, and how to build resilient cities that breathe. The Great Smog matters not only as an environmental disaster, but as a moral turning point. It shifted the terms of public responsibility. Citizens demanded cleaner air, scientists supplied evidence, and governments developed tools to respond. The tragedy showed how policy can change when lived experience, a city's choked breath, combines with clear scientific evidence and political will. As we close, we should not let the story be only a chapter in a history book. The Great Smog remains a mirror for our times. It asks whether we will act decisively when evidence shows harm, whether we will protect the most vulnerable, and whether we value a future where urban life coexists with clean air. If you found this chapter of history illuminating, subscribe to Truth in Time. Share the story with someone who cares about cities, health, or the environment. And next time you feel the air tighten, remember December 1952, when London learned, painfully, that the price of dirty air can be measured in human lives. Thank you for watching. Stay curious, stay informed, and breathe easy when you can.